Good evening, everybody. I'm Ratnesh. I'm a fifth year PhD student. A very warm welcome to all the students for this open discussion on does undergraduate training prepare you for modern research in chemical engineering. We have broadly classified the research in Department of Chemical Engineering into these areas. I believe faculty have given you an overview of research in areas like materials, computational simulation, biosystems, colloidal and interfacial, complex fluids. The remaining topics will be covered tomorrow. In this session, we have senior PhD students discussing about research in each of these areas and how does the undergraduate training prepare you for modern research in chemical engineering. In this session, one PhD scholar will talk about research in his area for 5 minutes and followed by a 10 minutes question answer session. It's an informal discussion and we appreciate your active participation. We'll begin with the first group, which is biosystems. I would like to invite Tirthankar and his group on the dais.
Just come. While I'm speaking, these guys will be in the dais?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. I am Tirthankar, and I'm working in an area which is broadly referred to as biosystems engineering. So I'll tell you about what kind of research is going on in the department in this particular area. Now, most of the research that is going on in the department is broadly in the area of systems biology. So let us see what is systems biology. Let's take a very simple example. Supposing you want to know how does a car function, all right? So you have a car in front of you and want to know how does a car function. The most obvious thing to do is to dismantle the car, all right, and look at the individual parts in isolation. So you dismantle the car and you look at the individual parts in isolation. Now, for example, you dismantle the engine and try to figure out what does the engine do, what is it made of, and so on. And likewise for the other parts. Now, this kind of an approach is called the reductionist approach. This kind of approach is called the reductionist approach, where you're basically dismantling a system, studying the individual parts in isolation. And this kind of approach is going to give you a lot of information about the system that you're interested to study. However, this approach will not give you the entire picture. To get the entire picture, you have to know how do these individual parts interact with each other, right? So when you start a car, what happens to the ignition system? How does the ignition system set the engine running? How does the engine, how is the engine responsible for the wheels to rotate and so on? So now note that the holistic view, where you are studying the entire system as a whole, depends on the information that you obtain from the reductionist view, right? So the reductionist view actually complements the holistic view. So now I go and let me speak in biological terms. So for example, you want to study a E. coli bacterium. So what is the reductionist view? For example, you know that within the cell there will be DNA. So what is DNA? What is the function of DNA? What are the molecules that are there in a particular double helix DNA strand, and so on. So a lot of knowledge in biological sciences has been obtained by the reductionist approach. So DNA, RNA, proteins, and so on. However, now people are interested in trying to figure out that how does a living cell function as a whole, all right? So to understand that, you need to understand how do the various components that are there in the cell interact with each other, and that is what systems biology is. Basically trying to figure out the properties of a living cell as a whole. So I got this particular definition from the Cambridge University website. Let me go through the definition. Systems biology is an integrated approach to the study of biology through experiment and the use of computer models with both predictive and explanatory power. It is interdisciplinary, requiring the participation of biological, physical, mathematical, engineering, and computational sciences. So if you look at the figure here, a lot of areas are there which together form systems biology. So the important things to note is that firstly it's an integrated approach, so you're studying a system as a whole. Secondly, both experiments and computer simulations are required, all right? And thirdly, which is also very important, that is hugely interdisciplinary. So a lot of expertise from various different areas, a lot of people from various different areas are actually working in the area of systems biology. So how now, the question is that, how is it related to your undergraduate education? So I just put a few areas, few subjects that you know. For example, you must be knowing computer programming, or you must be knowing chemical reaction engineering, or perhaps systems and controls theory. And all this is actually getting used in systems biology, to model cellular processes and so on. So that's in a nutshell what systems biology is, and then you can ask whatever questions you have.
So can you explain, can you elucidate more for me the role of TNF-alpha in Alzheimer's? Like if it's possible, like anything about neurodegenerative disorders, how TNF-alpha comes. And sorry, just to continue, and I understand that generally you would measure TNF-alpha with kids and all. So with like typical kits available, like, so here, like, what kind of estimation methods do you use for TNF-alpha?
That triggers for program cell death process. And if you have talked about program cell death process, right? So, and TNF alpha network, when you stimulate a cell with TNF alpha, the network has two arms, that is one going towards program cell death and one going towards the cell proliferation. Okay, so here the objective is, by studying the network, can you prevent the cell from going to program cell death? For that, you need to study the dynamics of some key protein molecules. Let's say in this case, any key protein molecules that are involved in apoptosis or program cell death. Okay, how can you avert it? What is the network they are embedded in it? What are the positive or negative feedback loops that are coupled with it? What are those type of reactions? Are those simple association-dissociation reactions, or are those enzyme cascades? So accordingly, we have to construct models, maybe deterministic or stochastic, and try to reach some logical conclusion in it. As far as the second question is concerned about how we track the dynamics of these proteins, right? So what we do is we usually tag them with another protein molecule. This is called as an antibody, okay? So this antibody is going to specifically recognize that particular protein molecule. It's just like a lock and key combination. There is a lock, I am designing a key, okay? And this protein is tagged to has a fluorescent tag. So this, we then analyze it using a single cell technique called flow cytometry. That is, it basically, a laser excites these cells, and these molecules fluoresce, giving us an indirect estimate about what are the levels in each cell, what are the levels of these proteins in each cell, and how they change over time.
So is antigen or anti-toad is having any relation with antibody? You just said, like.
In this case, whatever specified protein of interest is there, that is like an antigen. And whatever we are designing against it, that is an antibody. So it's like the lock is an antigen, key is an antibody.
Okay, so I'd like to thank Tirthankar and his group. The next group is climate science. I'd like to invite Pankaj Sadavarti and his group.
Good evening all. Myself Pankaj Sadarte. I am in the final stage of my PhD. Basically I will be talking about like our lab, what is the work undertaken, and it's like you can say more or less an interdisciplinary with a with a touch of chemical engineering. So basically I am from particle and aerosol research lab from chemical department. Okay, so if you just see on the slides, we have some of the points stated down on which most of the work has been taken in our lab. The first one is the atmospheric aerosol. So basically what aerosols are, like most of the people would know. How many of people know what are aerosols? Like you can raise your hands if you know what are aerosols basically. If you don't know, like I can explain it. Like aerosols, like they are the suspended particles, solid or liquid, in the atmosphere. Okay. So basically the atmospheric, how they are behaving in the atmosphere. Okay. So what are the emission sources for them? So we usually build an emission inventory for that, identifying the sources. Okay. So we have number of sources. We have the industry sources, we have to transport, the residential. Okay. So we usually know what are the aerosols coming from them. Okay. So like the particulate matter, the carbonaceous aerosols. Okay. So basically we do the work on quantifying those aerosols. Okay. So we need to know the background of each and every industry. For example, if I am considering an industrial sector as such. Okay. So I need to know what are the sort of processes in that chemical industry, in that iron. It may be an iron and steel industry. Okay. It can be a cement, it can be a fertilizer, it can be a refinery. Okay. So I need to know each and every processes happening in a particular industry. Okay. There is something called an emission factor, which is one very important term, which actually tells what is the rate at which a particular sort of species is being emitted from a particular process. It can be a process based or it can be a fuel based. Okay. So that sort of knowledge come over here when you just do your chemical engineering studies. Okay. So in that way we do the work on identifying the sources and quantifying the aerosols. Okay. So what are the methodologies that go into quantification? Like for example, if I am trying to quantify my quantity of aerosols over India or over some state from a residential sector, I should know what is the amount of fuel that a particular household uses. Okay. So what is the per capita consumption? Okay. I need to go into the database of digging what are the fuel fractions. So they vary as per the what are the fuels that you are being using. Okay. It can be from the coal, you may have totally different sort of emissions coming. If it's a cleaner fuel, a natural gas, you will have much less emissions. So the next, what we do exactly using quantifying them, either you can it can be a source of policy making for the government. Okay. You can show what are the mitigation options that you have to avert, to show what are the decreases in emissions by changing the technologies. If you have a worst technology right now in your industry, and if you tell that okay, there is a market for improving the technology, and if you improve the technology, there's obviously the emissions are going to reduce. So what exactly we do, we quantify them and we use the atmospheric models. So these atmospheric models are basically a combinations of, say, the heat transfer equations, mass transfer equations. Your thermodynamics come inside this. Those are basically the differential solvers, differential equations which are computational based. So we have chemical transport model and a GCM. Chemical transport model is run on a smaller scale with a fine resolution. Resolution means my size of a grid is a small in terms of say 10 to 20 kilometers or say 30 kilometers. But in GCM it's run on a global scale. Okay. We basically use a meteorology model. So basically if you have a puffs of emissions from different sources over a landmass, okay, so you need something to drive it. So we call it as a meteorological field, and that's given by meteorology models. So basically we give the emissions as an input to the model, and we drive the meteorology in order to understand how they are spatially distributed. Okay, that helps in understanding what are the major sources of what are the major sectors that's highly polluting. The second thing is to identify what are the major causes or the health impacts or the climate impacts that's been happening. That is the sort of analysis we try to do over here. The air quality impact, which deals with the particulate, what are the WHO norms, how are our sectors behaving as per the norms, are they above, are they below, okay. We do a sort of validation with those models. Anyway, if you do an experiment in a model, in a lab, you just verify it using some, you cross check it using some sort of equations. So over here what we do, we do a simulation, we do a computational simulation, okay, that gives out a value. So you need to know whether your model is working correct or not. So we do a sort of validation where the people go on the field, they do a measurements for the carbonaceous aerosols, for other trace gases also, and we see at that time step what was the measurement made and how your model is behaving. Also along with air quality, we do an ozone analysis, like the reactions being happening in the atmosphere. So how good are your say what are the sort of emissions that's being given out in the atmosphere and how they undergo chemical reaction to form ozone and how they are degrading it. On the climate, from a climate point of view, like say for example the carbonaceous aerosols, the greenhouse gas CO2, if I take the global warming potential of a CO2 to be 1, the carbonaceous aerosol has a warming potential of 1600 times the CO2, okay. So more our lab is more focusing on the carbonaceous aerosols, and there is a NCAP program recently coming up in our lab. So basically, I'll just tell a small example for this. Like we know the sources of emissions right now, okay, from all the sort of technology that's being implemented in industries or say in other sort of sectors like say residential, okay. So all your bricks that's being made, you must have seen while traveling that bricks, there is a bhatti that's sort of keeps on emitting the emissions, okay. So like brick emissions say, or the agriculture waste burning on the field during the winters time or during the April, May time, you see the field being burnt, being prepared for the ready for sowing of the seeds, okay. So like they are the major sources of carbonaceous aerosols. So what basically we do, we can say we basically ingest those aerosols, what we quantify it on a regional scale, we give input them to a model, we understand it on a spatial basis on a 2x2 and even on a vertical scale, and see how the radiative forcing is being, how the atmospheric is getting heated, okay, what are the hotspots, we understand them, okay, we understand the meteorology. So these are the major broad areas that we work on. Even like there is a colleague, my friend Prashant Dave, he would like to talk on the cloud dynamic part of thing and the statistical part of thing.
Myself Prashant, I'm a chemical engineer but working in climate domain. So basically what we do, there are two kinds of work we do. One is like science based, like physics based, and the other is data analysis based. So if you are interested in physics, knowing the physics, how these models works, or how are like mass momentum and energy equations are applied to the climate domain, how they are solved. You can go to physics and what does this mean once you get the answer out of this equation. Then you are the right person to work in the physics area of the climate domain. And if you are interested in finding out how large the data set, how to deal with the larger data set, you have to be in the climate domain, because the data generated is pretty much huge. For each file, like maybe TBs of data set we are generating. So if that you are passionate about dealing with larger data set, you should be working in the climate domain. So in IIT Bombay, we are dealing with both these streams. There is a third stream also that deals with the policy. So we'll address to these in the question and answer round.
Okay, fine. So if anyone has a question or a doubt like what we work on, or if you want to ask any questions, you can ask.
People are working in this area, but not much success has been achieved yet. So yes, opportunity is there. So we need passionate people like you to work in that area, so that we can address this problem. But not much success has been achieved yet. It's an open problem. Okay. One thing I can tell you, every chemical engineer goes through mass momentum energy balance equations, right? Second thing, if you like 3-4 such equations we can solve it. So if we go to larger set of equation, we need to apply numerical methods. So if we combine all this together, we'll get this chemical transport model and how to solve them. It sounds easy, but it is not. It's very challenging task. So if you love to face challenges, and if you face challenges in your chemical engineering also, similar things you can apply to climate domain. Any question, anything? Thank you.
Next topic is computational simulation. I'd like to welcome Harini and group.
Which one? This will go fine. And the pointer?
This is the pointer. This is where is the pointer.
Good evening, friends. Myself and my group work in molecular simulation and modeling. So it's basically an extension of thermodynamics, what you study in UG. So basically in UG you study classical thermodynamics. So classical thermodynamics, the properties you find there like pressure, densities and all those things. So you can find them by using molecular simulation. So basically we look into 3 domains: the property prediction of substances, fundamental understanding of few process or phenomena, and a multi-scale simulation done. So why we need molecular simulation? So basically you have set of experimental data. So to understand how it is coming or how it is generated, you can do molecular simulation to get a statistical viewpoint of viewpoint from atomistic or molecular scale and relate it to macroscopic scale. So basically what we normally do is study thermodynamic properties and transport properties as mentioned here, and we also look into crystal properties like semiconductor properties like lattice constant and bond angles. So the main tool that we use in molecular simulation is the molecular dynamics or Monte Carlo simulations, and few of my friends work in the ab initio and DFT calculations. So basically it's based on the very basic concept that you learn in thermodynamics, that we will select all those states which are stable. So stable state means which have less energy. It's basically something like a small kid is more unstable than a grown up adult, because he has more energy, he will run about, fall down, most unstable state. A grown up people, less energy, most stable state. So basically we tend to find all those stable states in our system and find the properties from those stable system, accumulate them and find a macroscopic property from there. So it's basically molecular simulation help us to pave the way between an atomistic viewpoint and a macroscopic world. So the relevant UG courses that help you all to go into this molecular simulation will be the classical thermodynamics. You should have a strong base on the classical thermodynamics, followed by the numerical methods obviously, and these numerical methods you can use for small number of equation to solve, but when we are talking about atoms, it's basically in practical life it is Avogadro number, 10 to the power 23 equations. So 10 to the power 23 atoms, and each atom will have momenta and positions. So you will have 2 sets of equation for each atoms. So you cannot basically use numerical techniques, you have to go for molecular dynamics or Monte Carlo simulation, but the basis of it is taught to you by numerical methods. The other courses that are teach in IIT Bombay in UG level are the molecular and statistical mechanics. Statistical mechanics basically give you all those equations that relates the atomistic properties with the molecular properties, macroscopic properties. And another is the multi-scale simulation, which is an elective course here. It teaches you how you go about doing MD or MC, molecular dynamics or Monte Carlo. Thank you. One of my friend, Ms. Paramita, will talk about this multi-scale simulation in which she is working about.
Hello everyone. Hi, I'm Paramita. I'm a third year PhD student over here. Actually, I'm working on the multi-scale modeling. Multi-scale modeling is usually a part of the molecular simulation over here. What is multi-scale modeling? Suppose you have a solid material is there. You want to know the solid mechanics or the physics or the chemistry or some material properties about that. But you want to do this on the molecular simulation level, then it comes under the multi-scale modeling. In the multi-scale modeling, usually we here work on the nanoscale level or microscale level. In the nanoscale level, we usually use different kind of potential fields or like LJ potentials, EM potential, my embedded atom method potentials, or in the atomistic scale level, some of the density functional theory is working over there. Now, in the multi-scale modeling, it is a very wide kind of area over there. Suppose, you want to know what is happening in the molecular level, the actual mechanism. You know some kind of experimental process which is going on. But experimentally is know that A is to B, we are getting an AB. But suppose you don't know what is going on the molecular level and how it is going on, how the atoms is actually interacting with each other. To do so, you need to know about their simulation. Multi-scale modeling is specifically one part of that. It is a very part of the molecular simulation. To do the multi-scale modeling, you need to do some kind of Monte Carlo algorithms, you need to do some kind of kinetic Monte Carlo or molecular dynamics over there. It's a part of some kind of material properties. So whenever you are actually doing work on the multi-scale modeling, you have to be a little brief about the crystallographic orientation of the atomistic over there. So when it comes for the courses, you need to do for this kind of thing. Some of the courses available not in our department or in other interdisciplinary departments are there, like material science department, they used to provide like crystallographic orientation, some kind of courses is going on, you can take, or some quantum chemistry. That can give you a brief detail how you going to do all these things, like you are working on the potential field or force field, but you don't know because every detail physics might not be available in of the chemical engineering hardcore department. For that you need to do some kind of interdisciplinary course. Courses are available over there, like quantum chemistry course or quantum physics courses are there. There you can get a detailed knowledge about all these things, and some solid mechanics courses are also there. You can get to know about all these things. There are two of my colleagues are there. One is Shrikant and another is Abhishek. They are also working on the same scale. Mine, like I work on the multi-scale modeling in the electrochemistry field. Like Shrikant is working on multi-scale modeling on the nano field mode. And the thing is like, it's a wide thing. Like if you say that I work on the nano field means someone can work on the experimentally. But in the atomistic level, when it comes to know the actual mechanism, you have to be off for the multi-scale modeling over there. Thank you.
Any questions? Nanoparticle synthesis.
Okay. You want to develop a multi-scale modeling of nanoparticle. So initially you need to know the individual atoms information in detail, how those atoms in actually oriented into the system. System means on the system on which you are working, like a silver system or a copper system or any other system, whatever you are working on. So you initially need to know how the atom is oriented in a crystallographic way. Then, you have to know that what kind of simulation work you want to do. Whether you need to do some sampling kind of work or what kind of, you need to do some thermodynamical properties or not. Based on that, what kind of simulation is you are going to do is related over there. Suppose, you need to do, how the atoms are actually interacting with each other, or some time scale from the pico to the nano time scale, how they are actually reacting. So you need to know some kind of molecular dynamics study over there. To know molecular dynamics, you have to develop some potential for those things and then you calculate. Or some properties like whether after some time scale, the crystallography of the system has been transformed from the crystal to the amorphous. If you need to know, then you have to do some radial distribution function or some other thing, or if you need to know some diffusivity coefficient or anything else, you need to calculate some kind of another thing. I mean, depends what kind of calculation you are going on or how your system is going on, how the reaction is there. Any more questions?
For calculating a VLE, we require an arbitrary constant.
Can you repeat the question once again?
For calculating VLE, Apple equivalent or SLE, anything.
VLE, huh? You guys give the answer. Give them.
But some component we don't have, we have to get this arbitrary constant. Then how we calculate this arbitrary constant?
Click here to go there directly.
Discovered, you don't know the properties of them. And many times what happens is a compound decomposes. If you want to perform an experiment, the compound decomposes and you cannot find the critical temperature and pressure experimentally. So, and also conducting experiments at high temperature and pressure is very expensive. So that's the reason there comes the importance of molecular simulation, where you can actually, there are methods by which you can find the critical temperature and pressure. The vapor pressures, everything, every information by which you can opt the distillation product, you can look for the extraction, the absorption phenomena,
Hello. Can we use Monte Carlo method for particle size distribution?
Just wait for the mic to come. Who's going to answer?
Solving population balance equation.
Just
In
wait, just wait for the
reactive
mic to come.
crystallization, my topic is reactive crystallization. I'm working on reactive crystallization actually, ma'am. And
Can you repeat the question? Just repeat the question.
yeah, I think for reactive crystallization, for getting population particle size distribution, we have to solve population balance equation. No? So there are some methods like method of moments is there, Monte Carlo method is there.
You can use Monte Carlo to solve that.
Yeah, I don't have idea about the Monte Carlo method.
Reaction canonical ensemble Monte Carlo method is there, which you can use to solve the problem.
See, personally, I'm not doing simulation, but in my lab, one of my lab mates is working. So you can get the size distribution of particles when nanoparticles have been generated. You can monitor how it is nucleated and how it grown. And once you have surfactants, then also for that system also you can get the particle size distribution by Monte Carlo. Yeah. So if you want to know details, you can talk to my colleague tomorrow probably. You can take the details from me, but you can get it.
Any other questions?
To add to what Pritham said, I would like to mention that Monte Carlo techniques are just like, they are not like a specific technique is there. We use a specific variant of Monte Carlo techniques known as the Metropolis algorithm. However, there are different variants of the Monte Carlo technique, which all basically have their basis in a Markov type processes, so Markov chain processes. So basically, I think you can use some Monte Carlo technique to determine the crystal size distribution, or use it to plug it in for the source and sink terms in your population balance equations, PBs. So you can use Monte Carlo technique, a different variant.
Let's thank all of them. So next group is materials. I would like to invite Advait and his group.
Okay, so good evening. I am Advait Chhatre. I am working in the field of simulation for nanomaterials,
I'll let this introduce my colleague. He is Pritam Bishwas, then Vinod Gupta, then Mehak and Ruchi. Now some of us, let me go like this. So how many of you are using LCDs nowadays? So anybody knows the full form? Liquid crystals. So liquid crystals, what are they? So the liquid crystals are basically liquid like crystals. So they can flow, but they also have the properties of crystals. Like most of the crystals we see, like sodium chloride, it doesn't flow on its own, but liquid crystals can flow. So these kind of materials that are being researched upon in recent decades, like since after 1990s mostly, they are a kind of materials that are come under the category of advanced materials. So there are several such kind of materials. For example, nanomaterials are one of those. Then this liquid crystals are one of those. Then smart polymers are one of those. So these all materials are very important in the technological advances. Another example, how many of you are using laptops? Almost everybody is using laptop. Like, so if you go on to the internet and search for the specifications of your processors, you will find something like I think some dimensions in nanometers. So these nanometers are the dimensions where you are actually using the nanotechnology today. So your laptops are already using the nanotechnology, and that is why you have the so fast laptops that in 1990s were a dream. So let me tell you that in any materials, like I am not specifically talking about nanomaterials, but like for any materials, there are three kind of streams where you can do research. The first one is the synthesis and characterization of new materials. So where you find out new ways how to make a new material and how to characterize the material, and that is one of the way. The second is the application oriented research. So for example, you develop a material for specific application, that comes under this category. So this kind of research is mostly done by the industry. For example, you have smartphones, so they all have some fantastic variants of the materials. So all that is developed by using application oriented research, which is generally done in the industries. The third part is the theoretical studies and the simulations. Now that is again a part you will be observing that every field that is coming, there is a component of simulation and theory. So it is always there, and it will stay there. So what here we do is, in actually what I am doing is I do monitor how the nanoparticles are formed, how the crystals grow by using population balances or Monte Carlo. I am actually using Monte Carlos for the calculation of size distribution of the particles, etc. So that is the thing. So on the other side, I have given the examples of the applications, field of applications where nanoparticles are used, and you can observe that almost every variety of the field is nowadays using nanomaterials, and it has applications in every aspect of the thing. So going to the thing, like what are the relevant UG courses? As usual, there are principles of chemical engineering, in which you will involve heat and mass transfers and everything. Transport phenomena, material sciences. Now material science is an extra course you will be requiring to learn for this, because it will you will have to deal with the crystal structures and glass transitions and etc. Then the basic sciences and the numerical methods in programming. The numerical methods in programming, of course, if you are interested in simulations, but the rest of the courses are very important. So if you have any questions, please.
I want to know about smart polymers.
Smart polymers are the ones that will change their properties based on some triggers. For example, polymers generally have very high viscosity, and they cannot flow just like water. Okay, so some variants of the polymers, if you give the some impulses, like if you change some pH, the polymers may change their properties and they can start flowing more freely. I don't say like water, but more freely than earlier. Likewise, there are some other conditions like polymers generally are considered non-conductor of the electricity. So there are some polymers, some students are doing research on conducting polymers. So that will be useful in many other applications, but some other students are working on that.
Can you tell us something about materials having memory?
Materials having memory. So there are many materials, like some of the examples are the worm-like micelles. They I don't have actually experience of memory wala thing, but the thing is viscoelastic materials are there. They are also smart. They come also in the category of smart. They change their properties on the various stimuli like temperature, pH, and some salt concentrations. They suddenly form into a gel, and if you change the trigger, they will lose their properties. Yeah, just a minute, she wants to add.
I want to add to this what Adil has told, that this viscoelastic material, so they have a storage properties. Suppose you are applying some shear or something, so they tend to change actually because of that shear. But suppose you are removing that shear, afterwards they are going to come to their original position. Not exactly the same, little deformation will be there, but they are going to come back to their original position.
Both the types of materials are viscoelastic.
But he said he asked about the memory, so I am asking about, I am giving the answer about that.
Sir, is there any research is going on perovskite, because it is a super material nowadays? Many researchers work on perovskite.
What?
Perovskite.
Ferro?
Veskite. Perovskite.
Ferrostite.
Used for the solar purposes, to storing the energy.
Yeah. So for that renewable energy part, many nanomaterials are used. Basically, nano wires are generally used as a heterojunction diodes in the solar energy part. So they are used in the form of a nanomaterial. So my colleague would like to add something.
So you don't have any other questions? Sure. So if you don't have any questions, I will come back to the topic, like how your undergrad knowledge is going to help you in your research. So I thought you people will ask something on that, but you didn't, so it tempted me to start talking about that also. Yeah, so I'd say it's really tough to say, and if you see, life is about learning every day. Till death probably you will learn, and if you expect that you join research or PhD, whatever you are saying, and you will stop learning, that is not correct. So whatever basics you are acquiring in your undergrad, that is really important, but probably you will not require that much in your research. So you will learn. It's a long process. If you are coming for PhD, it's not a small duration. So by that time you join here, you will understand what exactly you need to learn for your research work, to understand, to enjoy your work, what needs to be understood and learned. So I'd say the undergrad courses, whatever you have been taught, that is very important. That is the basics that is required to understand the advanced courses which have been already mentioned in the slides previously by other speakers also. So to understand, to grasp these courses, you require that undergrad knowledge. But yes, that is not the end. If you're coming to research, you need to learn more. You need to build on that basics, that what else you require for your research. And yeah, as mentioned by one of my colleagues, you require a lot of perseverance. It's a long process. So if you are very much passionate about it, if you are really interested, if you are very sure about it, that okay, I should join research, you should come, and if you are enjoying your work, the 5 year will go like a flash, you'll enjoy it. But if it is becoming tough, then it become more longer. So try to enjoy as much as you can. Okay. Any questions on PhD life or PhD research?
And how to write the research papers after experimentation or before experimentation, how the design of experimentation and optimization should be carried out, how to decide all this. Very basic question. Actually, we all have very basic questions. Here, we all have very basic questions: how to start research, how to decide upon.
So basically, you are asking me to give you a feel. You are asking me to give you a feel of my 4 years experience in 2 minutes. It is tough, but still I'll try. As he mentioned, it is possible in US. If you have some failed result, you can publish it in journals where they publish that, okay, this way will not work. And they really publish it. In India, it is not possible. I never saw an Indian author publish papers on that journal, but it is possible. And yes, experimental processes and all, see, there are 2-3 different approaches. What I believe is that if you're joining PhD, you should have 2 problems at least. Don't select a single problem. 2 problems which are related, which are very near. So one problem should be well-established field where people have already worked. You have a lot of literatures, you have a lot of information, everything is available, and you want to do something new. And second problem should be totally new, where you can innovate, where you can really invent something, where you can add something new, right? So if these 2 are going parallelly, then that will help you in every way. Whatever you plan, suppose one is failed, so second problem you can concentrate on that time and you can go ahead with that. And as far as experiment, how you can plan, that depends on you. That's an inherent thing. How much expertise you have, how much instinct you have, that okay, this will work. Probably if I change this, I'll get something new. So that's more of intuitive thing that I cannot answer. And if you're doing simulation, then I'd say in India, it's growing pretty fast. So it's a good time to join simulation related work, research work. That will help you in so many ways. There are also hurdles. Computation facility, everywhere you will not get very good computational facility. You will have troubles. There also, I'll just conclude. There also will have that same approach. You have 2 problems. One is known, so you can go ahead with that. If there is any hurdle, you will not feel that much at least, and that will give you a push to go ahead and do better things. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll have a discussion session on this at the end. Maybe Inderdeep will have a talk on this. So next I would like to welcome the colloids and complex fluid group.
Myself Sandeep Mandal, a 5th year PhD student working in the area of complex fluids. So I am focusing on granular mechanics, and he is Ankush, he is studying colloids, and Bhargava and Atul, they are working in the area of microfluidics. So you know, complex fluid is a different type of material which shows fluid properties as well as solid properties. So examples are, you can see these grains and these vesicles, means these colloids and slurries. So a granular material is a collection of large number of discrete particles, and size of the particles ranges from millimeter to micrometer. So when you apply stress on them, they flow like a liquid. And the examples of the granular materials are grains and sand, pharmaceutical peels. So they are handled in blast furnaces and rotary kiln. So we are interested to study the physics behind the operation of such industrial units. So in blast furnace, you know, the coke and iron ore mixture is charged from the top and air is passed through the bottom. So iron ore is 3 times heavier than the coke particles. That's why the iron ore particles sink to the bottom and the coke particles rise to the top. That means the particles segregate. So we want to avoid this segregation. That's why we study the segregation of the granular materials. And we are also working in the area of microfluidics. So in microfluidics, we are separating some micron sized particles from a slurry. So there are other several separation techniques like filtration or electromagnetic separation. So compared to these techniques, this microfluidics has several advantages, like it doesn't require any external force for the separation, and it can run in continuous mode. So you can apply this microfluidics to separate cancer cells from blood. Now Ankush is talking about this colloid. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. So I'll little describe about the colloids and interfacial part of the research. So colloids, typically you know that one phase is dispersed in another phase. So typically it's like solid particles are dispersed in liquid, and the sizes of the solid particles are around nanometer to micrometer. So if you want to see the Brownian effects, then particles should be in nanometer range, it should be sub-micrometer range. So then the research could be that you have a suspension filled with particles, and then you either add any third component to that, or you either some external forces like electric field you apply to the suspension, or if you shear those suspension, then how these particles which are inside the liquid, how they behave. So once you do this perturbation into the system, then you can see that either particles deform. So if you have spherical particles, it may have the prolet or oblate shape. And if you even give the electric field, then also it can have any shape perturbation. So there are various characterization techniques. So in colloids, mostly this is a part of nanoscience also, because your particles are in nanometer range. So you do different characterization techniques like scattering techniques. You can get the sizes of these particles by light scattering, by X-ray scattering, by neutron scattering. And apart from scattering, there are other also techniques to characterize these particles. Could be regular microscope, but regular microscope cannot find this nanometer particles, so you could go to the TM, transmission electron microscopy, or SEM, scanning electron microscopy. So this research which I am doing is a totally experimental work, so you can go through all these techniques to find the characterization of these nanoparticles in the colloids and interfacial science. And the application could be in paint industry and in drug delivery, targeted drug delivery, which is coming up very fast, where you have these nanoparticles suspended in a liquid and you encapsulate these particles with drugs, and then they are delivered to the targeted site of the human body, like cancer cells or like that. So it will reach to that part and then it will burst, it will rupture the particle. So once it ruptures, then all the drugs which are inside the particle, that will come out, and then that will heal your part, that part affected site. So the advantage of this drug delivery could be that you have increased efficiency of drug, and you have very good therapeutic efficiency. So I guess all this about colloids
and interface. If you have any questions, please can ask.
How colloids are or colloids assembly relate to viscosity and stability of the emulsion or nano emulsion or macro emulsion?
Yeah, so viscosity of the colloidal suspension depends on the particles which you are adding into the solvent. So there are various factors. It depends on the properties of particles which you are adding into the solvent, as well as the loading of the particle, that means the volume fraction of the particles. So if you have a high volume fraction of the particles into the suspension, that means you have lot of particles inside the solvent, then you will see that your viscosity will increase. And you have very dilute suspension, that means less volume fraction of particles inside the suspension, then you will typically see that there is a less viscosity. And if you want to characterize this viscosity, then you have to do the rheometry, that means you shear the suspension and you see how these particles give the viscosity. So once you shear, it could be shear thinning, that means your viscosity may decrease, or it could be shear thickening, that means your viscosity will increase. So that way you can actually do the stability test or viscosity test of the colloidal suspension. So you need to shear the particles so that it will show the viscosity effect.
My question is to Preetham Biswas sir, sitting right over there. Yes sir. So I want to ask, while you were an undergraduate, I mean, was it very crystal clear in your mind that you wanted to go in research? I mean, how does one go about it? Since one's state of mind may change within a period of time, within some passage of time, and I may regret the decision that I make today. So in short, how did you go about it while you were an undergraduate? Since I am one.
So being honest, I'd say when I was in BTech, I was not very sure that I'll land up here. I like generally what people think, I thought of joining a job and I worked for 1 year, and then I realized how it is, how much enjoyable it is. Then I've gone for my master's, and there actually I understood what is research. That thing came in master's only. In BTech, my project, that was just like a project where I have to score well, I have to have good marks. So in masters, when you really enter into research part, you realize whether you are enjoying it or not. From your heart, you can, I mean, there's a feeling that you are really enjoying that, and then you'll understand that, okay, whether I can pursue for that or I should drop that plan. Because after masters also you can join R&D firms, different companies. But as I have seen that that part already, that how it works in offices, in companies, probably I was very sure that I want to go for research, because it gives me inner pleasure. You will enjoy that, doing research you enjoy. But yes, there are issues also. You have to be very clear about it, that there will be failures, you have to face it. But still I enjoy that part. Sometimes you start enjoying failures also. So if you are getting that push from your heart that, okay, I'm really enjoying research, I'd say whoever is that person, he or she should pursue research. It's a great thing. You'll understand that how you are different from others, because very less percentage is coming here.
Okay, so next we have a group which is like quite familiar to all of you, the reaction engineering and separation group. I'd like to invite Shravan and his group.
Hello friends, this is Shravan. I'm a 4th year PhD student, and these are the research group who are working in reaction and separations. So So this is a group where you can use your undergraduate knowledge right away actually. You will be reading heat transfer, mass transfer, reaction engineering, thermodynamics, fluid mechanics and all. So how can one apply these kind of concepts in research? For example, if you want to minimize nitrogen oxide emissions from automobile industry. Okay, so the combustion system of any vehicle is just a reactor. So ultimately what you will be doing, you will be just seeing whether that reactor is a PFR, a CSTR or a combination of these two. Whether just changing the dimensions will minimize the emissions, or you really need a catalyst to decrease the conversion of NOx. So this is how you actually approach to a reaction engineering or a separation topic. And so for example, for separation, if you want to design a gas absorption system, so you might be reading regarding packed towers and gas absorbers. So if you want to increase the gas absorption system, you can apply all the concepts of packed towers, what should be the void fraction and all, or what should be the type of packing which will increase the interfacial area. At the same time, is there any material which will enhance the surface of gas solid contact, gas liquid contact? So this is how you usually approach. And so these are the courses, and the applications have mostly they have industrial applications, and they have applications in environment and even sustainable development regarding renewable energies and all, and to some extent electrical also. So for example, multifunctional reactors. So you people might have read regarding distillation and reaction engineering separately. So when you do research, you might come across a system where you want to get more product, right? According to Le Chatelier's principle, you cannot go beyond a limit when the reaction is an equilibrium reaction, right? In that case, the multifunctional reactors come into picture. So what you need to do is, whenever the product is produced, you have to keep on removing it. So such kind of systems can be designed by using reactive distillation or reactive chromatography. So this is how you usually use your concepts for research. So at the same time, you have to learn a bit when you come into research. There is there are two approaches for this kind of systems. Like some people do experiments and some people do simulations. Why they when to select what, right? So if your experimental system is simple and the materials that you require are readily available, then yeah, you can go for experimental work. But in some cases, your system might be complex, and incorporating changes to the system might be difficult. At the same time, if you in some cases the materials you want to work on might be very costly. So in such cases, you cannot right away go for the experiments. So in that case, you usually do some simulations, come up with a final model, and then you actually go for experimentals. Okay, so this is how you usually approach. So one thing is you will be reading all the concepts in your UG course. So first try to understand in which field you are interested in, then you try to select that field and you try to do the research in that field. Okay, thank you. We are open to questions. Yes. So Mr. Ratnesh, he is working in separations field. He is working on enhancement of gas absorption by introducing nanoparticles into the liquid stream. Okay, and Sachin, he is working in electrochemistry, and even Neelam. So they are working on electrode deposition, you can say. Yes. So Amit Agarwal, he is working in CO2 capture by using silicate slurries, and Boja, he is working on multifunctional reactors, reactive chromatography and all. for hydrogen isotope separation, and Rucha, she is working on NOx emissions reduction in automobile industry. And myself, Shravan Kumar, I am working on biomass gasification and chemical vapor deposition. Thank you.
Sir, if we compare plate column and pack column, then which one is more efficient?
It's okay. It's part of your UG course. Like anyhow, I'm not going to answer that. But what I will say is like when to apply tray column and when to use packed column. So it depends on the material that you use. It is not the efficiency that always drives the design. It is the usability of the system which actually drives. Okay, sometimes the system might be less efficient, but that might not. That might be the only system which is suitable for that like feed. So it's not the efficiency that always drives.
Ma'am, is there any scope to use the scrubber system on scale down, means to reduce the emission by any reaction and separation techniques?
Like general emissions, any emission. So generally in like nitric acid plant, the NOx emissions you have, you use like gas absorption system. But in automobiles, like you can't do that since like you have to have very fast reaction. So residence times are very low. So there you use catalyst. So that is like that is not absorption. That is mainly you use reactions to reduce NOx to nitrogen.
It's like this. So when you want to use any multifunctional reaction and separation together, you have to overcome certain problems, like you have to get your reaction and absorption. So you have to find a suitable absorbent. Then only you can go for this multifunctional reactor. So not only the solvent, and also said like whether it is a reaction control or mass transfer control. That is the main criteria to design this multifunctional reactor. So maybe what happens is in some cases, conventional reactors only perform better than the multifunctional. That's why no one has used in that area. So that might be
Anybody works on a catalyst separation?
So it's like this, na? It's like a liquid separation. You imagine as a liquid separation, you can use any distillation or chromatography separation.
Distillation.
So, membrane separation if it complex, if it is complex system.
Complex system, then you can use membrane.
Yeah, membrane is very costly, but if it is like, if you first system you try is the distillation. If it don't work, you go for the other techniques like membrane, adsorptive separation.
Generally you immobilize them. I mean, that's why like people prefer heterogeneous systems, because with like what kind of catalyst you have, some ligand, metal salts, or what catalyst do you have? Okay, so you can immobilize them on some membrane and I mean make it heterogeneous, like that's what I or like recovering.
So very complex mixtures can be separated through adsorption. So that is the main beauty of the adsorption. But the complex thing is regeneration of the adsorbent. That's where the challenge comes. So the adsorption, you can see any JC and HPLC, all these are working based on these adsorptive techniques. So many BIOS operation where you can't use where the heat is the major problem, because so you can't heat these products to the higher temperature. That's where the adsorption comes. It can work at room temperature or any low temperature.
Hello everyone. What are the research areas in specific reactive distillation? Because everyone knows now that many research papers have been published about reactive distillation. That is, for a particular reaction, we have a particular sets of parameters which we know. So what next we can do research in particular reactive distillation column, as in with.
Yeah, I can say that there is no end to any of the reactors. Like we know batch reactor, we know PFR and all this. Still there is a lots of improvements is happening. So as per your question is reactive distillation, where it is now. So it's known for the many standard reaction, reversible reactions works very well for the in a reactive distillation. But when, let's say I take an example of ethyl acetate, which forms of many azeotropes, like ternary azeotropes are there, binary azeotropes are, which makes the complex in distillation, even reactive distillation. So if you take methyl acetate system, which is very simpler, with a one column, if you give the feed, you will get a methyl acetate one side and water on another side. But you won't get this thing in a ethyl acetate. So what is the problem? But because of this system complex, now it's sometimes it's going into application part. So we are trying to apply reactive distillation for many reactions. That is the one area. So other area you can see that, so temperature sensitive I said. So can we work at a cryogenic distillation? So many scopes are there. So as I said, VLE, wherever VLE is not favoring, wherever the azeotropes are there is a scope to improve. Simulation, yeah, simulation comes whenever the system needs. So it's all, first simulator requires a data. First reactive distillation or any multifunctional reactor you see, you need a kinetic data, and then you need a VLE data or thermodynamic data. Then you will go for the simulation. So as far as I know, so simulator plays after the feasibility is there. So once the reaction is feasible, then only you go for simulation. So anyway, experimental knowledge is required for this simulator.
Thank you. So we'll proceed further. So like you can ask in banquet dinner. So we are running out of time, so sorry. So I would like to invite now Process Systems Engineering Group.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my team has settled. So till now you have seen one side of coin, the one which does not appear in front of in any of the process control engineering field, any of the process plant, is advanced process control. Those guys will never look in front of the process, but if those guys stand outside of the plant will, it is impossible to control the plant. So let me come with one simple example. Why do you need process control? So whoever has been attended today's session, BTechs, you need process control or not? Yes or not? Yes, sir. That's it. Any more groups? I could able to see some PhDs also. Okay, fine. What you can able to see? Process systems engineering. It is telling that some computer science, applied mathematics, chemical engineering. See, let us, with a simple example in a distillation column, you will get only few measurements. The measurements is something like temperature and pressure, right? But the objective is you have to control the product purity. So there can be so many kind of uncertainties in the process, but it's not possible to know what kind of uncertainties. But if you ask this question, he says yes. Say yes. he can design such a controller that any kind of uncertainties, robust. Mr. Hariprasad has came up with a robust control design, so which has been published recently. And coming to the application point of view, so I have a controller, it's okay, fine. So I can place so many controllers in my plant, and everywhere I can ensure that the plant is in well controlled position. But at the same time, the issue is, am I getting correct information from the plant? So let us say somebody is speaking from there, but I will keep mic from here and ask the questions. Is it a correct location? Yes or no? Say yes or no. So see, there are so many strategies. Come on, there are so many strategies which happen in the industry which you don't know. You will place sensors at some place, you will get measurements from another place, but you should need an optimal allocation of sensors. I have to place exactly my mic where it has to be positioned.
So I will be doing sensor design.
Where
to place the sensors to get the desired, satisfy my constraints or criteria.
He is Mr. Suryanarayana, he has to say that first. Okay, he has been working in sensor allocation. So still two parts of process has been done. But the thing is, the process is going to be much more complicated. It's not like I have placed sensors and I have I am placed my controllers and I am going to get a good product quality. It's not happens. But still, your process controllers itself is going to be unstable. So the reason is the way that the control algorithms has been designed. So it is some kind of state estimation. Apart from that, it is some optimization strategies. Can I combine these kind of strategies, optimization and state estimation? These two questions, these are the two terms I have introduced, but I am not going to address all these questions. But Mr. Jairam, he is working on
I am working on real-time optimization of process plants. So basically, the plant is reactive system. So last 2 minutes. Basic idea of what is real-time optimization. Normally, in the plant, we operate let us consider any system like reactive system or any CSR system. We operate at steady-state points. So because we need to get the product quality and all.
So, 2 per minute.
But the system doesn't remain at steady state. Because of the disturbance in the plant. Let us consider the disturbance as sudden input changes, feed flow changes, or sudden power fluctuations and all. Because of these disturbances, as well as the disturbances are also like the market conditions. Based on the market conditions, what is the product quality which you need to maintain? Based on these conditions, you need to immediately based on these conditions, the set like the quality, the set point which you are maintaining, so need to be changed. If it doesn't change, we are operating as optimal. So I work on measuring the disturbances and like finding out the optimal point and updating the optimal point in the controller, so that like as a plant which is running, so like it is operated.
Yeah, the plant which is running is operated continuously at an optimal point rather than a suboptimal way. Yeah. So the basic, so my background is a chemical engineering from BTech as well as MTech is a chemical engineering. So the basic requirements for this particular area, process control area, are like you need to have a good inclination towards the mathematics, and you need to have strong programming skills, as well as one more thing.
Some fundamentals of statistics.
And also the main thing is you are working on a plant, so you need to have a very sound knowledge of a chemical engineering concepts. Yeah, so I'll be handling over to.
Yeah, thank you, Jairam. So I have only 2 minutes left, so let me finish it fast. So he is setting the control. He is taking control action over there. So it's okay, fine. So finally I had to explain one more thing: state estimation. So in real chemical process, distillation column, you will have only few measurements, right? Temperatures or pressure, but there are concentrations which I need to estimate. We came up with some new algorithms which handles all non-uncertainties. I mean, which you cannot model, which you cannot expect, which you cannot predict. These kind of uncertainties we have taken into together while developing these algorithms. Apart from that, finally, I kept my controller, but at the same time, my controller is going to fail.
I will check the health of the controller.
Right.
In short.
And at the same time,
stability.
He is Mr. Chinmay Rajhams. He checks whether your controller is stable or not. And all behind this controller, optimization is needed. He is an optimizer.
So finally, we need to take into account that the whole process, it may be some chemical plant or whatever the process may be, it needs to be actually run in an optimized way. Now it may be, if you talk of any particular system, be it a heat exchanger or pump, whatever, then we need to check about the optimum temperature if it is a heat exchanger or something else. And if you talk of the total plant, then it may be several objectives. For example, it may be the reduced cost or maybe maximum yield, something like that. So total plant-wide optimization. And again, the same process can be done maybe 2-3 different types of ways. Each one may be having some inherent advantages as well as disadvantages. So for that, we need to do some plant-wide superstructure-based optimization. So you will get to know details about this in Professor Shastri's lecture tomorrow about the total process systems engineering. Thank you.
Thank you, Somajit. So, questions? They know application side. Yeah, fine. Finally, all these things we are practically implementing on a solar plant.
Yeah.
So he is Mr. Surendran.
Yeah, I'm Surendra. I'm working on control of solar plant. Basically, the solar radiation is not going to be constant throughout the day. So we have to provide the energy to our consumer.
You know, Earth rotates.
Earth rotates.
So sun direction also will change.
Yeah. So the solar radiation. Yeah. So the solar radiation is not going to be constant. So sometimes you may get. Sometimes you may get more energy. You have to store that energy and then you have to supply that energy while the customers need. So sometimes you have less energy and you have to fulfill the customer needs. So there is some efficient way to how you can able to control the plant, so you can able to attain the proper customer need. So we are working on the modeling and the control of the solar thermal plant based upon the different types of controllers. Yeah, thank you.
Questions?
Hello. How projects are undertaken for optimization, guys? How projects are undertaken, because most of the companies are now into this field and they are successfully doing everything. They are applying optimization softwares to refineries and or petrochemical complexes. So how projects are undertaken by IIT, by you guys? Do companies come to you and give you a scenario that, see guys, we have got 10 distillation columns and we have to optimize this. So you do like that, or you do a general one distillation column and you are optimizing it?
So first thing is, how many of you are very familiar with Google? You know, when you enter any string in the Google, it will do some optimization search, you know. It do that.
So actually, most of these are application based in a real life system. Like for my system, it is algal biorefinery. The total algal biorefinery from the algae to the biodiesel and the other pharmaceutical components.
It is an emerging field.
And then few of the others in the lab, they work on, let's say, some robust design for a municipal solid waste disposal system, or even first generation, second generation, these renewable energy sources also, like bioethanol and etc. So regarding the company's participation, still in this particular process systems engineering group, not this one anyway. So in our process systems engineering group, this plant-wide optimization started maybe some 2 years ago or so. So this company's participation is still now not that visible, but hopefully it will also increase.
And you need not worry that you will get a job after working in PSC. If you don't get, just ask me.
So regarding this algal biorefinery which he has taught, I think ABB had a plan to sponsor the project and things like, and one of the research committee, doctoral committee member is from actually from ABB Bangalore. So regarding even Vidya's work also regarding the control process monitoring, so the industry has tremendous interest, and again one of the member research principal scientist from ABB is one of her doctoral committee member.
So what happens here is, we develop algorithms, means not directly solving the problem. For solving problem, we actually try to develop an algorithm. We don't use existing algorithms. We apply first the existing algorithms, and we also think of whether can we develop any new algorithm, means generate our own, develop own optimization formulation. So like our work perspective is like theoretical. First we work on theory, and then like we look what apply on some what case study. Means when company comes, so our perspective is like first using not using the existing ones. Means we see goes through the existing ones, but rather like we also try to develop a new algorithms. Like our work perspective will be much more in theory than on applications. So as of now, there are consultancies there, but we mostly work on theory, which helps in applications. So both the ways, like application as well as theory.
My question is to you, sir. Can you explain the recent research area, in particular controller design? Sir, please explain slowly.
People are very angry about me. I hope I can enjoy my dinner today.
Hello. So in the controller design, the advanced control strategies, mostly what we practice is model-based control, model predictive control. Model predictive control is actually 5 decades old. Now the variants of MPC, model predictive control, are in place. We mostly try applying this model predictive control under uncertain conditions. Like the plant has uncertainty. You are measuring the temperature, but you are getting some different temperature. So your controller should take care for the uncertain measurement, and you need to control the plant. So the recent emerging area in controller design, in advanced controller design, is basically a robust controller design, where the controller, even my plant, even the actual plant is having uncertainty. I don't know how it is operating, but my controller should be able to control the whole system. Yeah, so this is in context of continuous systems. If you are a batch system, if it's a batch plan, batch plan, there is something called iterative learning control, where in batch plant operates alike. So if once you feed the inputs and you take the output, then after that next batch you feed in and feed out. So there is a similarity in operation. So these similarity in operation are taken into account in something called as iterative learning control, where what is happening when something is happening during the batch process, you actually learn the happenings in the batch to control the next batch. It is sort of, what should I say, learning based control. So similar to that.
Thank you, and thanks to my team members.
IIT Bombay has housed this facility in a centralized building, which is safe. Yeah, we have a lot of facilities like the transmission electron microscope, the chromatography for measuring concentrations, and probably you will have a visit to this facility tomorrow, as said by Professor Patwardhan. Now I would like to invite our PhD representative, Mr. Inderjeet Shirve, who will talk on philosophy of research. So this can be followed by the general questions which you had.
Very good evening to everyone. As already introduced, I am Inderjeet Shirve. I have completed 2 years in my PhD, and I will be currently in 3rd year. So by now you might have all acquainted with all research areas which has been offered in our department. Also may be inspired by various labs, equipments, and the students, zeal of students, seeing the zeal of students, how much they are how much they are involved in organizing such events, right? So here I am not going to tell you about all the research stuff, but rather I will tell you about my journey of becoming a researcher. So starting from my childhood, I was too inclined towards science and experiments, and with all credits goes with credit due goes to my mother, who once was explaining me how the goosebumps takes place in our body. So she was, I remember that she was telling me the goosebumps are the response of our body to the two particular stimuli. Those are physiology and psychology. And she told me, she also added that if I am going to pursue science as my profession, then I may be able to link why our body is responding in a single manner for these two different stimuli. And this has inspired me to take science as my profession. Thus, the first important thing of being a researcher is to be inspired to do something. And for your case, when you are inspired to achieve something. You have to go beyond. I mean, you have to inspire and think beyond. Like most of the cases, what happens, we are conventionally bound with our traditional thoughts and methods which have been going on. But if you have to be perfect in our research, you have to think beyond, and you have to come up from your cycles, what have been whatever has been taught to you throughout. Moving to the second important thing, I did my bachelor's from Lakshminarayan Institute of Technology from the Department of Surface Coating. In my final year of project, I was given a project wherein I have to design eco-friendly paints. At that time, conventional method of synthesizing paint was using a solvent, and solvents are harmful for the environment. So I asked question to myself, like, why I do need to add solvent at all? Exploring the answer to this question, I was able to formulate a liquid resin which at the end of the formulation of a paint, I don't need any solvent. Thus, questioning a conventional method is the key in the research. Renaissance or rebirth which have led to the modernization in 14th to 16th century in European countries is nothing but questioning what is easily assumed. So to be a successful researcher, we need to question all simple assumptions which we make in daily lives. How many of us knows that the earth is round? But how many can, I guess everybody knows, but how many of us can actually prove at this moment without any assumption that earth is round? Let me tell you, to prove something which is very simple or trivial is much more difficult than proving something which is very complex. It took me to figure out the earth is curved for roughly around 3 months. Thus you need to question each and everything in the research. That is the key important thing in your research. When I completed my bachelor's, I had 2 years of masters in Institute of Chemical Technology. Therein I was working on the separation column. I was too inclined to know what are the physical phenomena which are occurring in the simulations column, and which have led me also to synthesize some mathematical expressions. These mathematical expressions have led me, and I was too determined to make this mathematical expression to some form of simulation. And after working out some couple of expressions and working on some couple of simulations, couple of softwares, I was able to simulate the entire column. This have actually paid me when my actual equipment was broken, and I was able to still surmount so many details, and I was able to complete my thesis. Thus, the determination is also an important thing to survive in research. If you are into the research, there will be so many ups and downs. Your problem may not be defined. Your experiment may not be set up at all. Your experiments may give faulty results. Your results may be too less to come out for any valid conclusion. So there may be so many problems. It's like you are in cold dark night and you have to reach somewhere. You have to reach your home. And in this case, when you are in research, your home is you're compiling a thesis and submitting in your work. So, but you have to be determined that you have to do something. You have to determine that you are going to achieve something, and achievement for a researcher is you are going to add some information such that the knowledge of humankind is being raised. So that considering these an important thing as a deterministic, I then moved on from my masters. I undertook a project here in IIT Bombay. I took molecular simulation as my theme, and once I was taking this project, I realized that I have to relay my basics. Why this so is because because at the molecular length scales, whatever things which I have studied is no longer helping me, because at the molecular length scale, your particle loses its identity, as in there is no solid, there is no liquid, there is no gases. So you have to you will feel that it's like altogether a new world. And I was a little bit faithful, like I was having little faith that I'm going to still survive in this world. So for any researcher, it's his or her problem is nothing but a new world. He or she has to be have a little faith in oneself, and definitely they will be able to conquer. So to sum up, what all things are required in the research is, first of all, you need to be aspiring to do the research. The second important thing is you have to be deterministic about what you are going to do, and what you have started, you are going to complete it. Also, the questioning each and every simple assumption is also a key step, and then only you can lead your grounds. You can lead your what your findings and etc. Also, at the end, you also need to have some little bit faith on yourself, like yes, you are going to through, because the life of a researcher is not a simple task. It's actually very difficult, but as soon as you are in the research, as soon as you are into the research, you will feel that you are all alone, but you are free to think whatever you can think. So you can aspire as much as you can. You can think of any complex thing as you can think of. There is no limit for it. But if you have these 4 important qualities, definitely you are going to be a successful researcher. With this, I wish you all the best, and I hope to see more researchers in times to come. Thank you very much. Not to me, right?
So there are 2 points. Would you like to change the research with your research, or would you like to change yourself with the research? Which one you agree? First one or second one? Okay, fine. Hold your decision. So, how many of you have been traveled in old ambassadors? Especially in a rainy season in 1990s, you don't feel difference between staying outside and sitting inside. How many of you have been seen recent tsunami at Japan? All the cars are floating on sea. Exactly, water, not even one single drop get into the car. This is not my example. This has been explained recently by one of the employee from BRC. So actually this is one fundamental example. You have to be keen observation in research to be consistent. To be consistent, Earth rotates every day. So in most of the times what people used to do, so take the textbook 2 days before the examination and by heart it. So if Earth decides that I will do it 24 hours job in one single day, what happens? Just plot a tangent towards the Earth, you will move with such a fast. So these things. So what researcher needs to be consistent, to be perfect, and every time you should not leave your observation and your intuition skills. Intuition levels, you should not, you have to hold. You may ask, how can I get this? So these are undergraduate studies which has been designed. So this has been designed to train you completely to go for research. It's not like that, I did BTech, I did MTech, now I will go to PhD. Don't do that. Seriously, don't do that. So it should be pakka in your planning.
You want to add something?
So in short, no. So PhD is like a fun ride. Why? Because so it is not monotonic every day. It is not at all monotonic every day, because every day when you go to your lab, so you'll find you'll be having different experiences, because you might do one experiment today, it might get failed, you may get disappointed, but very next day, you will come up with some other experimental design. So it is not like doing the same thing every day. You are working on one particular topic means your channel is very narrow, but the experience that you get, once you go out, the way of your thinking, you will be means your way of thinking will be broadened. So it is like a fun ride, exactly. Means that is when the thing is, many people go for jobs. Means I don't say it's very boring, but it is very monotonic. It is very monotonic. It is like doing the same job every day. But here the thing is, you will get a very different experience. Though it is sometimes very disappointing, 100 times, you try the same thing 100 times, but all the 100 times are total 100 different experiences. That's it. It's a total a fun ride. But only thing is, people think, अरे यार मेरे ज़िंदगी में 5 साल इस पे चला जाएगा, मैं क्या कमाऊँ? It is not like that. In earning perspective also, after 5 years, what your colleague, BTech colleague earning might be, you may earn some 5 times or 3 times, anything, earn more. And that too, the self-satisfaction that you have, means that you get, is totally different, because everything that you do is by your own, means that is you earned. Okay, so you get, initially you will get topic from guide. Afterwards, there will be some point, they will expect from you, not they want you to come up with some ideas. So there is the point where you actually be very active. You will feel yeah, now it's enough, I should able to come up with my own ideas. So these are the things which will actually help you to motivates yourself. It's like something called self-motivation. It's not like there won't be any kind of bossism. No one will drive you. You should you should know how to drive yourself. So initially, I used to have very up and downs. I came from very remote small village or a town, but it took some time for me to adjust. But afterwards, my way of thinking, now I'm speaking so fluently without any fear, that was all due to my PhD or research experience. So it is like a total fun ride. There is nothing PhD is not a big thing. It actually opens up. It actually opens yourself. So what I can say, it's a small, very good fun ride. Only economically might be, you will not have anything, but you will have self-satisfaction. That's it. Thank you.
So I would like to add some small things. So in your schools, we always have in 5th standard or 6th standard, we have some questions we have been given some bullets and you have to write a story. So everybody has done this. So PhD is the same thing. You have to write your story. Only thing is, some bullets are given to you, some you have to find yourself.
See, at the end you have to envisage yourself where you want to see 3 years later. For example, now you're studying chemical engineering. So do you want to divorce it and go to MBA and pursue another life? Or you enjoy this education and want to pursue it further? At the same time, getting a lateral expansion of your knowledge. Just like the way we have here a very multidisciplinary approach. So this I would like to suggest you to think that where would you like to see yourself 3 years later, and are you going to be satisfied in pursuing what you are doing now, or you want to divorce what you are doing now?
बैटरी चाहिए उसको, बोलो बैटरी लाने के लिए। बाहर जाओ, बाहर एक आदमी है। नहीं ये वाला जो माइक है ना वो चल नहीं रहा, बैटरी नहीं ये बैटरी चाहिए ना सुनने के लिए, दूसरा बैटरी। हाँ तो आप बैटरी दो ना मुझे, वापस देता हूँ आपको। हमारे रिकॉर्डिंग तो
ठीक है.
The backend that works, and don't think PhD is like fun or it's of course it's a fun, but if you do everything seriously in life, right? Life is a serious, and it just becomes difficult. So you just have to enjoy every moment that you get. You will get very less moments. At times it can be as hectic as you can work like throughout night we work in the labs, right? So just make sure, like they might have put it like it's very easy, straightforward. These areas are there. Just start with the areas and you get the results. But unfortunately, it's a lot of hard work that goes behind in each and every one of us, right? So we do put in a lot of effort, and IIT Bombay, the name that stands for itself is because of this hard work that we put in, right? And you are in the system, you will be trained, you will go in the system, and you will have to do it, right? There is no option for it, and you will have to do it, and you will get used to it, right? You have the team behind you, we are there, right? Seniors are there, juniors are there, faculties are there, resources are there. IIT is full of resources, living, non-living, right? IIT is full of resources, living, non-living, right? Non-living is like you have lots of good library, online resources, many other things, right? Living resources are of course people, right? Of course you can, I don't know, some of you may be taking from animals or plants or something. There are people who work on that also, but people are the main living resources. So resources are there, you have time frame, it's what you do, right? How much hard work you put in, it's all that matters, and how you make yourself better for doing research in life, right? End of the day, you have to do research in life, not just these problems, right? 4-5 years, they teach you how to do research in your area, but end of the day, you have to learn how to do research on your own, because after some time, you will be independent, you will have a team behind you. Some people will be working below you, right? Or you will become some faculty and there will be some students below you. So in the end of the day, they depend on you after some point of time, right? So it's not that easy the way it might have looked out, but there's a real lot of hard work that goes behind it, and just think about doing it and system will take care of you, right? Just be passionate about it and you can do it, right? So thanks.
One more thing to add up, whatever we are telling you is to motivate basically to the bachelor's and the master students who are here, to motivate them to pursue PhD. But I also know that there are some PhD students over here who are already in first year, second year of PhD. So I hope they won't feel, dejected, but they will also agree with whatever we are saying.
You can ask any informal questions also. Like how's the hostel, how's the food in the hostel?
So okay, what after PhD? So exactly, so are you an MTech student or a BTech? MTech students. So what kind of perspectives do you have towards life? Means how do you want to design your life? What? Options. Options like you can go to industry. Industry means any consultancy firms, research laboratories, you can go to teaching. So these are two different options you have. You can open your own consultancy firm. Means you can become one, you like your own entrepreneurship. So
end of PhD is end of the beginning. If you are in research,
End of the beginning. He wants to say, I guess, beginning of the end of the beginning. क्या बोल रहे हैं?
PhD level. Because otherwise you always work below an MTech. I mean that's what our professor at BTech level had told me. So any other questions? Okay, so there are no other questions. So I believe that you have got an overview of the research being done in Department of Chemical Engineering at IIT, and how does the undergraduate training program prepare you for doing this research. As you have seen, some of the research areas show direct relevance to your undergraduate training, whereas some of the interdisciplinary subjects require more fundamentals which are majorly covered in the subjects in initial phase of your PhD. Finally, I would like to thank all the PhD scholars for spending their time for this discussion. Thank you. And there's a banquet at 8 p.m. in Gulmore.